town knew about darkness. It knew about the darkness that comes on the land when rotation hides the land from the sun, and about the darkness of the human soul. The town is an accumulation of 3 parts which, in sum, are greater than the sections. The town is the people who live there, the buildings which they have erected to den or do business in, and it is the land. The people are Scotch, English, and French. There are others, of course, a smattering like a fistful of pepper thrown in a pot of salt, but not many. This melting pot never melted very much. The buildings are nearly all constructed of honest wood. Many of the older houses are salt boxes, and most of the stores are false-fronted, although no one could have said why. The people know there is nothing behind those false facades, just as most of them know that Loretta Starcher wears falsies. The land is granite-bodied and covered with a thin, easily ruptured skin of topsoil. Farming it is a thankless, sweaty, miserable, and crazy business. The harrow turns up great chunks of the granite underlayer and breaks on them. In May, you can take your truck out as soon as the ground is dry enough to support it, and you and your boys fill it up with rocks perhaps a dozen times before harrowing and dumping in the great weed-choked pile where you have dumped them since 1955. When you first took this tiger by the balls. And then you have picked them up until the dirt won't come out from under your nails when you wash and your fingers feel huge and numb and oddly large poured. You hitch your harrow to your tractor, and before you've broken 2 rows, you bust one of the blades on a rock you missed. And putting on a new blade, getting your oldest boy to hold up the hitch so you can get it at it, the first mosquito of the new season buzzes bloodthirstily past your ear with that eye-watering hum that always makes you think it's the sound loonies must hear just before they kill all their kids, or close their eyes on the interstate and put the gas pedal to the floor, or tighten their toe on the trigger of the 30-30. They just jammed into their quackers. And then your boy's sweat-slicked fingers slip, and one of the other round harrow blades scrapes skin from your arm. And looking around in that kind of despairing, heartless flicker of time when it seems you could have just give it all over and take up drinking, or go down to the bank that holds your mortgage and declare bankruptcy. At that moment of hating the land, the soft suck of gravity that holds you to it, you also love it and understand how it knows darkness and has always known it. This is the People's History of Horror podcast, and we are your hosts, Aaron and Mike, here at the People's History of Horror podcast. And today at the People's History of Horror podcast, we are covering Salem's Lot Part 1. And that'll be right here at the People's History of Horror podcast.
All right, you're done. All right, you're killing my high, bro. And first of all, we're not covering Part 1. We did that already. We're doing Part 2. Okay. All right? So, yeah. Mike here. Welcome back. Sorry about that. Yeah. We're covering Part 2 of Salem's Lot. And, man...
It's the Emperor of Ice Cream.
The Emperor of Ice Cream. Thank you.
I got that right.
Yay. Anyway, we're covering Part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream. Well, it picks up pretty quick. We left off last time with Ben and Matt, discussing that, hey, this is vampires. And what do? Well, Ben goes home and steps out of his car and proceeds to get his ass whipped. I mean, Floyd Tibbetts just gives him the business. So, he's in the hospital. Well, Susan's talking to Matt and, bump upstairs, bump in the night, go check it out. She's downstairs and hears a vampire upstairs with Matt. Vampire leaves, he pulls out his crucifix, shoos it away, and proceeds to have a heart attack. So, he's in the hospital too. So they have a meeting in the hospital, decide, let's pull in the doctor. And they talk to him, and now him and Ben are kind of, they kind of go on a little adventure. And old Danny Glick, yeah, remember him? The iconic scene in the window? Yeah, it happens. So, old Mark Petrie decides, I need to handle this too. Susan's in it with Ben, obviously. So, they're kind of, getting a group together. They talk about getting in Father Callahan. So, they do it. They're quartet, if you will, is finally coming together.
And so, much like the previous vampire novels before it, like Dracula, now we have a team of vampire hunters. And it's not really a proper team quite yet because they're kind of separated into groups, especially further on, because you have Mark and Susan both end up separately coming up with the brilliant idea of going to the Marsden house alone.
And you never split the party.
Yeah, and see, Mark's not even a part of the party. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire book is little Mark Petrie stumbling upon Susan roaming around in the woods outside the Marsden house with a wooden stake, like clearly come to the same conclusion that he is, and him being a kid, like he's a no nonsense kind of kid, even though yes, he's into horror stuff and comic books and such, but like he was just straight up like, don't bullshit me, I can see that you're here for the vampire. And she tries to play dumb about it, like, no, of course not. Like, even tries to hide the thing behind her.
I just found
like,
this wooden stake. Like, come on, bro, really?
And so, yeah, that is an amusing thing. But then they decide to go into the house, and they run into Straker, and things don't turn out well. And poor little Mark Petrie ends up alone in a room, all tied up by his lonesome. And who knows at that point what happened to Susan, but
we do.
Here we have two groups. They've been separated. Mark doesn't really know that there's a group of adults other than the one that he found trying to break into a vampire lair.
Yeah, he has no knowledge of the other people trying to handle the vampires. He really thinks like it's him versus the vampires for the sake of Salem's Lot. The town depends on him.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, like you couldn't really ask for a better kid to be in that situation since he knows all the lore. He's up and up on how to deal. He deals with, like you were discussing, the famous window scene. He deals with little Danny Glick there pretty well for,
Yeah, he does. Take a crucifix to the face.
Tends to work on vampires. But let's break this down a little more. So I want to stick with the idea that the four actual characters that are in this book are really just four sides of King. So we were just talking about Mark, so we'll stick with him. This is a kid who we learn pretty early on kind of has his shit together for a little middle schooler.
Yeah, pretty well.
And
just handles that.
He really takes his problems, by the horns and wrestles them to the ground. And while on Susan's part, it was kind of a silly decision to go to the Marsden house. Because she knew she had like a team, people to back her up, and she was kind of trying to, I guess, be a proactive character, even though that's precisely what she's not. But to me, it was kind of a silly decision for her to go up there.
You mean to tell me Plot Device McGee made a dumb decision? Ooh.
But then it seems weird to say, but on Mark's side, it wasn't really a silly decision because from his perspective, he is, like we were saying, all alone in this situation.
Like, this is a 12-year-old boy that knows no adult is going to take him serious. If he's like, hey, guys, we're dealing with vampires. No, they're going to be like, shut up. Quit watching horror movies. But he knows this, and he's taking it upon himself to be like, you know what? I'm going to boss up, and I'm going to handle this. You're dumb, but
you're also a little 12-year-old.
Respect,
so it's like,
man.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really Mark's character is that. Yeah, like he's a little kid, and like we were saying, that is a prototype for further King characters, little kids who get into, certain shitty situations and dig their way out of it. Sorry for that the disgusting analogy there, but
it's true.
Yeah. And yeah, he's really the first one. And with that scene, on the other side of that scene is Susan, who we already kind of mentioned in the last episode isn't really a character. You just referred to her as plot device McGee, because that is really all she tends to be, you know, especially here coming up soon. Like, you'll see precisely why I would say that. But in this situation, it was, you really are just kind of setting yourself up as either a martyr or bait. And you kind of should have known that going into the situation that you put yourself in. You're trying to break into a vampire lair.
To be bait, the rest of the team has to, know and be part of that. And frankly, they weren't.
Yeah. But with, Mark, he went up there specifically with a job to do, even though, let's be real, there was never really a chance of him succeeding. And he ends up getting tied up in a room by himself, completely helpless at that point.
I wouldn't say completely helpless.
Well, no, he does find his way out. He uses his little Houdini skills to break out of it, and yeah.
Gotta love it, man.
He takes out fucking Straker by himself, knocks the man out, and bails out of there. That's pretty, like we saying, that's pretty, fantastic for a little 12-year-old. That's impressive. You can't ask for much better from your little kid protagonist. So let's go back to the other party for a minute and talk about the newer character here, Dr. Jimmy Cody. He's another interesting character added to the mix.
So he is Matt Burt's doctor. Not just his doctor, but his former student as well. And there's a real fun relationship there. The dynamic they have is great. A lot of banter back and forth, a lot of busting his chops. But yeah, Dr. Cody, man, they tell him, and honestly, it's kind of surprising because he's immediately on board.
Yeah, there's some initial skepticism that I guess
everyone would have.
Yeah, but even if you're prone to believing those kinds of things, someone comes to you with it is still hold up, I'm gonna need more of an explanation. And to be fair, we did mention in the first episode that the whole vampire thing was kind of obvious from just what was happening around these people. If you knew anything about vampire lore, it had to at least have occurred to you. Yeah, that's what this.
But it's got to be that dismissive thought you have immediately. You're just oh, vampires. You're no way.
Yeah, and that is kind of his initial response, but with a little bit, it was also coming from Matt though, so it's kind of.
I wonder how many kids in Salem's Lot actually looked at their buddies when all this shit started happening. It was bro, it's vampires, just joking around, and now they're just oh shit,
fuck. It's actual. Well, one element of this is kind of the idea of this kind of novel. Sorry about that. This kind of novel being, a little microcosm of a larger scale type of story. Because I believe we mentioned it, at least in a discussion with each other, that this book is kind of an apocalypse novel shrunk down to the small town size. Because, spoiler alert, shit doesn't turn out well here.
The town, if you read the very beginning of the book,
prologue,
which I'm supposing you have at this point, the town's dead.
Yeah, so it's an apocalypse novel, and so if you take someone like Jimmy Cody and blow him up to the scale of what an apocalypse-sized novel would be, you'd end up with someone like...
your top scientist.
Yeah, I was going to say you'd end up with someone like Stephen Hawking or Carl Sagan or someone like that. And if someone like that comes to you and is like, hey, bro, our town's being attacked, by vampires, you're gonna take it a little more seriously than if I was like, "Yo, Mike, there's vampires."
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's true.
And so, I mean, I'm not saying that Matt is, a Hawking level genius or anything, but for this small town we got to know some of the characters. A lot of them are pretty ignorant.
Yeah.
So, in comparison to a lot of these people, like, he is pretty smart, and so to them, he would kind of represent at least that academic side of, like, these are the smart folks that figure shit out. And if one of them is telling you there's vampires, you're going to take it at least a little bit more seriously than just the bartender or...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so that's kind of how I was looking at that situation. That's probably why Jimmy Cody was like, this is one of the few other educated men in this town telling me, hey...
Well, this is someone he knows. He knows extremely well. Someone that shaped him as a person. So, I mean, yeah, he's going to take it serious. I mean, hell, if one of my old teachers that I had a personal relationship with at that point, like, if they come to me and told me that, I'd be like, well, yeah, you might be crazy, but we're going to check it out, man, you know?
Before we get too deep into this, because I do want to cover these other characters, I thought I would just kind of rehash some of what we was talking about last time. And that's the inspiration and everything. And so I found these specific quotes. And this is just a book by Stephen Spignesi. He did like a corpus of facts about Stephen King. And this is in the Salem's Lot. It says, King's childhood friend Chris Chesley tells the story of having dinner with King and Tabitha and discussing Bram Stoker's Dracula. I told a version of this story from his introduction last time. They mused about whether or not it was possible for Dracula to exist in modern times, i.e. Dracula in the frozen foods section of a grocery store. And this inspires King to take a swing at his own vampire novel. And on becoming a brand name, King recalls the dinner. The dinner conversation that night was a speculation on what might happen if Dracula returned today, not to London with its teeming millions, as Stoker puts it with such purely Victorian complacency, but to rural America. I began to turn the idea over in my mind, and it began to coalesce into a possible novel. I thought it would make a good one if I could create a fictional town with enough prosaic reality about it to offset the comic book menace of a bunch of vampires. And we did kind of touch on that last time about how these vampires weren't the Victorian, freely wearing vampires. These are the...
No. These are terrifying vampires.
Yeah, these are the EC horror comic, bloody fang dripping, menacing, just slightly disgusting vampires.
Yeah, I'm here to suck your blood, but I'm gonna eat your face, that vampire.
And so that is basically what he was going for, but he did want to... I mean, there's another thing here. It says, and on writing, King described Salem's Lot as a peculiar combination of Peyton Place and Dracula. Another thing we mentioned last time. And so, I don't want to rehash all of that. I just wanted to keep that in mind, like we said, that Dracula is, this is basically just a retelling of Dracula, an American version.
Yeah, it's Dracula in a small town, man.
And so, because he's not really a part of this part, I just wanted to touch back on the main villain of this novel, since otherwise we wouldn't have any reason to discuss him this go around. Is that Kurt Barlow is the master vampire of this situation. And later on you'll see that he's basically shown to be the opposite end of the spectrum from the next character I wanted to cover, Callahan. And so, speaking of Callahan in this part of the book, he's not really mentioned much other than another aspect I wanted to talk about in the grief of the Glick family. They had the whole funeral situation where Father Callahan, he's drunk as he's doing the eulogy and everything, and that is
and he has to deal with the father. Was it Tony Glick? Is that his name?
I think so. I think it is. But no, I was going to just mention that with the fact that he was drunk at the eulogy and having to deal with that is a throwback to the fact that, once again, Stephen King being an alcoholic during this right time, he was also drunk when he was giving his mother's eulogy shortly before the publishing of Carrie. So that's just a thing. Or no, it was shortly before the publishing of this one. I mean, Carrie had come out, and that was like the last thing his mother read. But I just wanted to touch on that little personal note that he kind of slipped in there as in regards to our discussion about King using Callahan to kind of work through his own demons there. But that does bring us to the Glick family, who ends up not sticking around for very long.
No, they're gone. That's actually the little adventure that Ben and Dr. Cody go on, is to try to get a look at the bodies of the parents, because, surprise, they died this morning is what they were told.
Yeah, so that's I like this book because it does do the almost episodic adventures, on their march into this climax that we'll be getting to on the next Salem's Lot episode. But he's really, wrenching up the tension in this section a lot, and the suspense starts really getting rolling. Like, what's gonna happen next? There's a bunch of things piling up on each other, and just a few of them are bodies. Like, there's the whole second window scene with Susan and Lil Mark.
Yeah, so this is great because Mark gets a call. This scene is a callback to 2 scenes with Mark. It's a callback to his meeting with Susan, but it's a callback to Danny Glick in the window, because here's Susan in the window, and you know what? How can Susan be in the window? She's a vampire now.
Yeah, and so that is how we end this section of kind of that reveal. And it's also, like we were just discussing Callahan, he becomes a little bit more important right before this, because he realizes, he's the one that's got the most power, as, you can't see, but I'm doing the air quotes. He's got the most power as far as, here's a term you might not understand, but it is mentioned in this book, the power of the white. That becomes way more important going on, and it's not, a racial thing, but there is a certain recognition that Callahan has of, like, he's gonna have to be a part of this, and him wrestling with his little loss of faith and whether or not he's gonna have the power that's needed to really hold his part of this up, and that's an interesting way to end it. You have one of our characters is down and out at the moment. Another one of our characters disappears, becomes a vampire. Another one of our characters doesn't even know whether or not he's going to be any help because he's doubting his own powers and ability and so on. And then the only characters left is a
12-year-old.
A 12-year-old, and then Ben, our main character, who, let's be honest, hasn't really done anything up to this point other than just be there for other people who are doing things. He's been a punching bag. Yeah, and he's already established that there are people in town that he can't beat in a fight. And so imagine if
he was a vampire, though.
I'm just saying.
Like, Dracula would kick your ass.
All right, that's fair. But I just wanted to kind of like put that out there that this is our hero's situation here at the end of part 2, is that
it's looking pretty gloom.
Yeah. And so really the main character left to discuss is once again Jerusalem's Lot itself. And we do go back to several characters we met in the first part, kind of touched base with them to see how things were going. In most cases, not so fucking well. So
a lot of them aren't around anymore.
Yeah, the town is a lot quieter than it used to be, even for a quiet small town as it was.
So Salem's Lot is kind of just havoc is being wreaked everywhere. And it's not just out in the open, but it's just your neighbors are just disappearing, left and right. And
People stop going shopping, stop going to work, stop. There's no one really driving the roads anymore. Things are just really eerie and quiet. And even the people who are kind of out and about are kind of keeping to themselves. And
yeah, everyone's scared to go out and about. And then, like you said, the ones that do, like, they're not talking to anyone. They're like, you try to talk to them, and they're gonna be like, nope, and just leave.
yeah, and so that's the nice kind of picturesque small town that we get at the beginning of the novel when Ben first shows back up in Jerusalem's lot. It was never like the friendliest or anything, but it was definitely more small townish, where you see the sheriff sitting on the porch of town hall, and you got your nice little soda fountain you can go have a drink at the pharmacy, and
kids playing in the schoolyard, and
like there was shit going on. And now at the end of part 2 here, we got
it looks
things,
like a ghost town, but it's obviously not when you go through. But yeah, if you're just passing through, you can be like, well, maybe it's a town and everyone's just busy. But I mean, if you were to tell me this place was abandoned 5 years ago, I'd be like, oh, checks out.
You really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And so that's just Stephen King has done, in my opinion, a pretty good job with this book of, letting us get to know this town, these characters, these people, letting us learn some history. We get, some of the town legends, and this is a small town complete with its own haunted house and its own, corrupt government, and there's, histories of mob activity around. They even got a story of a town fire. Like, it has everything that you would expect like a small town like this to have. And it is also seemingly becoming a ghost town, which is a separate, prototype, but he did a good job of slowly turning this place from a small town to a ghost town. With there isn't really like a seam in that transition. It was pretty smoothly done, kind of behind your back while you watch these main characters try to deal with it.
Yeah, like, because they're dealing. It's happening while they're dealing with it, because it's what are they dealing with? Well, the Glicks went missing. Well, there's 2 of them.
By that point, there's already...
He visited the parents. They already, like, kind of... they didn't come out and just say he did, but you can tell from context clues.
I mean, any reader is, like, even if you're not paying super close attention, it becomes quite obvious as you go along, like, wait a minute, that's what was going on back on page 30? Okay, like, at some point in this novel, even the laziest reader will catch on pretty quickly to exactly what's going on. But somehow, he manages to keep that suspense taut, and, like, you're still waiting, like, okay, but what, like, there's vampires, I get that. But what is about to happen to these characters that I've come to kind of like, you already see a couple of them starting to drop. Yeah, well, so that pretty much covers the part we read this time. We don't want to get too deep, otherwise we'll start having to talk about the third part, and this climax that's coming up is a pretty good ending, I have to say, and I would like y'all all to come join us and discussing that part again, and we will see you again here on the People's History of Horror podcast.
Oh, don't start all that again.
Signing off.